Mr. Infrared. Haas, how are you?
Good. How are you? How are you?
Doing
What's up,
good.
Haas?
Hey, what's up, man?
So yeah, for those who don't know you, Haas, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
I'm Haas from the Infrared Show, and we've been in this for like a year now. And I'm mainly on Twitch for now. So yeah.
Are you streaming to YouTube or anything right now?
Nope, not streaming at all.
Oh, okay. Then, so Nick didn't need to introduce himself then. Although I still don't think he needs to. But all right. So I know that Nick was watching a lot of your debates with Destiny, and I think that probably is what sparked this whole thing. So I guess I will let just Nick take it off, and yeah.
Yeah, hey, how's it going, Haas? What's up?
Good. Good myself. How about you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, no, I saw your debate with is it Jackson Hinkle or Jason Hinkle?
Jackson. Yeah.
Jackson and Destiny and that other guy. Girl, I don't know what the other one. I don't mean to offend. I know you're on the left, but I don't really know what that was. I don't want to misgender that individual. But yeah, I thought the debate was great stuff. Really great job holding down the fort for Russia. So what? How would you describe yourself? Are you a Stalinist? Are you a Nazbol? What's the situation over there?
Not a Nazbul, but definitely 100% Stalinist. And I am pretty heavily influenced. I don't consider myself a Duginist, but I'm pretty influenced by Dugin. And I definitely don't think that Western Marxism Leninism uh, is viable today, right? So I'm definitely drawing from some pretty heterodox sources for my thinking.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's funny you say that because I am a huge fan of Joseph Stalin myself, and I actually got called out by Right Wing Watch this week because I was on a show and somebody said, like, who's your political hero? And I said, well, honestly, it's Joseph Stalin. And everybody's like, oh, well, that's just so, he's a fascist, just like you are. But I think he was incredible. What do you love most about Stalin?
Genuinely, I think Stalin. Here's what I think. I think he pursued the correct line under pressure when it was very easy to bend. He pursued a straight path. So that's what I admire most about him. For me, Stalin, he's the man of steel. So it's kind of speaks for itself.
So true. It's so true. Yeah, I mean, like all these right-wing people, I mean, they say, oh, he's this communist, he's a butcher. And like, I personally, I'm not a fan of the collectivization of agriculture. I am not a Marxist, so I don't support that. But as far as personal leadership goes, there's something to be said about a guy with a plan and just pushes forward at any cost, even when it was hard, even when there was resistance, even when it faced sort of these early problems, he pushed through and ultimately was a success. Ultimately, the Soviet Union was collectivized, industrialized, nuclearized. The results speak for themselves. I'm a results guy. I'm a big fan of results. And you can't argue with the results that he produced. It's good to see that because I feel like it's all these like neoliberal types in the middle that would say, oh, Stalin was this horrible dictator. And this sort of Duginist left-wing people as well as reactionaries can sort of handshake and say,
yeah,
Stalin was awesome.
One of the important things to keep in mind about Stalin, another reason why I admire him so much, is that not a lot of people know this, but Stalin, when I say he was going straight, he was dealing with threats not just from the right, but also from the ultra left. Trotsky's plan for the Soviet Union was basically to turn it into this kind of like, society where 90% of people would basically be slaves, and intellectuals in the cities were going to have tyranny over everyone. So to me, I also think there's a populist element to Stalin where he is really representing that Russian peasant as opposed to the kind of intellectuals coming from the city who were more westernized. And so to me, there's that aspect as well, is that Stalin was able to resist those ultra fanatical people who wanted to just completely liquidate everything, liquidate culture, liquidate, Russia as a nation, and completely liquidate the Orthodox Church and all that kind of stuff. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, well, and hang on. I think, can you guys hear me better now? I think I was on the wrong mic
Yeah, much better
before.
actually.
Okay, yeah, everybody was texting me, like, you're on the wrong mic. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that's one of the things where, and it's, let me know what you think about this, because people talk about the so-called red-brown alliance all the time in these circles. I've always said it's fool's gold. I've always said, I think this conversation really took off in 2016 when, Donald Trump was appealing to the so-called Bernie bros and brought over some disaffected whites who voted for Obama. They said that Jack Murphy wrote the book Democrat to Deplorable. He's not really representative of that. He was just like this Jewish sex freak. He really wasn't one of the Democrats that became deplorable, like a white union guy who hated Obama. He was more just like a Jewish grifter in DC. But there was something to that, like the Bernie bro, Trump, and former Obama to Trump pipeline in Michigan, Pennsylvania. And I've always been skeptical of this, because you would see historically a lot of these so-called the brown shirts, the alt-right types, and they would say, they were making the overtures to the Chapo Trap House types and to the left-wing people, and always would be rebuffed. I remember there was one of those former alt-right guys, 1.0, 2.0 alt-right types, went to an anti-Iranian war protest, and all the left-wing people booed him out. They said, "You're a fucking Nazi, get out of here." But then I see somebody like you. I saw your speech at that conference. I forget the name of the organization, the one that Abraham
CPI.
Lincoln, CPI, yeah. I saw your speech there, and you said, we're not going to be able to draw from the left, where we actually see more potential in the right. So what do you think about the potential for this sort of so-called red-brown, between and I don't like brown, I'm not a brown shirt, but the so-called populist right, populist left coming together on key issues? What do you think about that?
So, just like you, I'm a results-oriented guy as well. The ideology stuff, I think when we get bogged down in that ideology is supposed to be a guide. It's supposed to be a guide to results, right? So to me, we're faced with this unipolar system, right, of the deep state and the city of London and, the monopoly capitalists and Wall Street and Silicon Valley. These people control our country. Regardless of what ideology you have, this is the situation we're in, right? So what I'm interested in is creating a movement that can actually not only challenge this, but overthrow these people. And what comes after, we could do whatever the fuck we want, right? We can't do it. It doesn't matter what ideas we have in our head. You can't do anything as long as you have this establishment, right? Which, on the left side of things, they wanted the healthcare, right? Bernie wanted the healthcare. You could have had the healthcare, but we don't have it because of the insurance industry, right? The health insurance industry. And then, the right, it has its cultural views, and it has, it had its views on immigration and so on. And we all know that it's not going to be allowed to be able to have a serious immigration reform, because capitalists in this country use cheap migrant labor to displace and drive down the wages of the working class. So, it does. I don't really like to get caught up in the details of ideology. Now, on this thing about the red-brown alliance, interestingly, that has its origins in Russia itself. So during the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had this neoliberal, Yeltsin and the oligarchs. They took over all of Russia. And then on the ground, you had, monarchists, you had nationalists, and then also you obviously had communists, right? And the neoliberal press would call it a red-brown alliance, because they basically created this popular front where they were like, okay, on the one hand, we have this foreign neoliberal agenda that wants to starve and loot and, basically destroy Russia. And then on the other hand, you basically had, a popular front. What else to call it, right? So that's actually the origin of that. And, the reason we don't have anything like that in the United States is because we have a left in this country. We call it over at the CPI. It was actually Caleb who came up with this term. It was the synthetic left. So this left that we have was basically created in the laboratories of the deep state and the CIA, and then pushed out into the masses around, the 60s and the 70s with that counterculture and that new left, right? And ever since then, we've had this kind of, the left has been the vanguard of the ruling class's agenda.
Yeah, well, and I think that's really the crux of the issue. And me and Destiny actually talked about this. And I think he understands now that I'm a good faith actor. I think years ago he thought that I was just like, I was the secret neo-Nazi with like this concealed agenda. And I think now he sort of sees me more as, I do believe in the things that I say. I wouldn't suffer this persecution for the things that I say if I didn't believe in them. And I said, like, doesn't it give you pause that woke capital? You look at the capitalist class. You look at all those institutions you mentioned: deep state, Silicon Valley, City of London, which I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a pretty big red pill that a lot of people aren't really aware of. Don't you look at those promulgating the same things that you say? And in other words, don't you see maybe you're on the wrong side of things? Like, all these institutions are evil. They're pushing horrible things financially in terms of war, anywhere you look, privacy. And so if you're on the same side as like the worst people in the world running this evil empire, maybe you're wrong, right? Maybe like your whole ideology is wrong. And he came at me with this very naive thing where he's like, well, actually, I don't think it's so bad. I don't think that, big business is bad. I don't think that the deep state is all that bad and this and that. And that's where you get these guys like Vosh, Fat Ian Kaczynski, and the guy's literally taking money from the deep state. And it's like, I just said this on my show the other day. Where are the liberals? Where are the true leftists that used to recognize that the CIA would install fascist governments across the world, like in Chile or in Iran? Now you get these liberals and leftists that are cheerleading the color revolution in Ukraine. And naively, I said they got James Clapper and James Comey on CNN. It's like decades ago, you had anti-war liberals, anti-CIA liberals, and now they're all cheerleaders. Like you said, the synthetic left created by and for the deep state and their agenda. And that's where I'm like looking for the so-called real leftist that recognizes, to summarize it in a concise way, that the number one menace to the world is not the so-called neo-Nazis, the January 6th Proud Boys, whatever. It's the deep state. Like, because I think about the war in Iraq as a catastrophe, 20 years, millions of casualties, and who's responsible? Like, it's the DOD, it's the State Department, it's the Israel lobby. That is a real component of it. That's not, if you point that out, they say, well, you're anti-Semitic, but they want to go after like those guys in Michigan, that just got acquitted with the Gretchen Whitmer plot. It's like these guys couldn't come up with $400 to buy explosives from federal informants. We're supposed to think they're the number one threat to humankind and like the workers or whatever, and not the deep state, not like the U.S. Pentagon, the military. So that's where I think you guys are so on the money. And I'm like looking for the opposition where it's like, okay, maybe we don't agree. Maybe you're not like a Catholic integralist or whatever, but we both agree about who's killing all the people, who's the real class enemy, whatever you want to call it, who's the author of all the pain in the world. And it's not a live streamer streaming from his parents' home saying like the N-word sometimes. It's the power. And I think that you guys are fighting the power just like we are,
Yeah, Destiny is actually a good example of why is it that, let's just assume he's not a federal agent or something. Why would a normal, regular person just like for free shill for the establishment? You're not even getting paid. You're just out of some kind of ideological loyalty. And, the truth is it's the media. The media creates this image of a wholesome world that people become psychologically attached to. And they watch their Marvel movies. They consume their bullshit. They're on Reddit. They play their video games. And they develop these emotional relationships to this media they create, right? That like it addresses their personal traumas, it addresses their personal story. So they have this like deep attachment to it, right? And then, Destiny, the reason Destiny is a good example of that is that guy basically, he started kind of debating right-wing people on Twitch one day on, out of a blue moon. And then all of a sudden the mainstream media started writing puff pieces for him and stuff, right? So like all of a sudden he got this validation from the mainstream media he's never gotten in his life before. So like just immediately he has this relationship of dependency on the media. And that's why he's going to shill for the establishment. It's not because he's actually connected to the City of London and these bankers and all that kind of shit. It's because he has a psychological attachment in terms of his own validation as a person with the media. And that's true for pretty much everyone. I mean, these Redditors who are cheering on what's going on in Ukraine, they've created this fantasy of what's going on. It's Lord of the Rings, the hobbits of Ukraine fighting the orcs or whatever the fuck, they have a psychological, attachment to this. So that's really, I mean, when you look at people like me, I mean, I can't really speak much for you. I'm sure it's the same in your case. It's just that we cause people pain. We're poking a bubble in their wholesome universe. It makes them so butthurt, right? It's like, what? It's like they're blaming us for the fact that they're wrong about the world, right?
Yeah, it is. It's like a socialization thing. And like ultimately, I think at the end of the day, that's what it is, because it's far easier to just peddle the sort of fiction about so-called our democracy and like human rights. And to stand athwart that is to stand athwart most people's entire lives of programming, in the sense of, hang on, I think I'm getting swatted right now. So let me, on that note, I'm getting a call from the police department. So just let me mute myself. You guys carry on. I'll probably be like 10 minutes.
Holy shit.
This has been happening to them a lot lately. It's crazy. It's scary. This happened to, and on stream too. So how are you, Haz?
I'm pretty good. I woke up a little late today, so.
Did you? How was your weekend?
I was worried I was gonna miss it, because I didn't get sleep. I got sleep,
I would cry.
Yeah.
You don't want to make me cry.
Yeah, I made sure I was able to make this one.
Yeah, we literally moved our entire inaugural stream all for you, Haz.
So does this happen often, this swatting thing, or it's kind of crazy?
This has been happening to a lot of the Grapers lately. Somebody's been targeting them for sure. It's dangerous. Like this is really dangerous for whoever.
I can't tell what idea is scarier. Is the government doing this, or are there actual human beings out there?
I think there's human. I think I have my guesses on who's probably behind it, because there's been a lot of people targeting them lately. I wouldn't know for sure, obviously, but it's just very odd that a certain a competing channel has been their entire show is dedicated to trash talking these particular people, and those particular people seem to be getting swatted quite often. So it's just a little
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, this is a new world for you. You got lots of gorillas in chat, though.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You want to tell people what the gorillas mean, because for the people that don't know you?
Yeah, Gorillas and Sons. It was kind of back when I was at 20 viewers, and I was giving a speech about how I was sick of communism being like this pussy shit. I wanted what happened to communism with a capital C, right? And then people in chat were spamming those gorillas because I had earlier given an analysis of King Kong, and it was I said something like King Kong represents our primordial humanity, and it's defying the deep state, and it's defying the agenda of Davos and Great Reset, whatever. And so it's kind of like it's primordial humanity, So, and then the sun thing, it was kind of I was talking about communism should be solar. It should be about strength. It should be about, the power and might of the people. It shouldn't be this kind of, eternal victimization and whatever the fuck, leftists had turned it into. So ever since then, it just caught on automatically. So Gorillas and Sons, it just kind of became a meme,
I know Justin's been a big fan of yours, so I don't know if you want to ask him any questions while we wait.
No, I've just been watching a lot of your content. I kind of sit in the shadows and watch. But yeah, you've red pilled me on a lot of stuff. I was a far leftist, and now I'm more like a tanky, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah. You and Jackson.
It's interesting because it's even the tankies are divided, and our type of tanky is very unique. Me, Jackson, and the CPI, we kind of are at odds with the entire left, including the people that call themselves tankies as well. So,
Justin, I think that's you. Something's good. Wait, are you muted, Justin? Wait, now it's gone.
It wasn't me.
Was that Todd?
I think so.
Yeah, it was probably Todd. All right, Todd.
But he wasn't on here earlier when it was doing it.
Yeah, I think he was.
Oh, was he?
Maybe, I don't know. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Haas.
Yeah, I mean, there are some so-called tankies who just do it as it's kind of like a third worldist identity politics thing. And one of the things that sets us apart is that we actually believe in an American communism. So we believe in an American working class, an American kind of like a socialism with American characteristics, as they would say it. So we're American populists, if you will, right? And we don't have this thing where it's we don't take the anti-imperialism thing to the point where we hate all of America itself. And we understand there's a difference between the American people and the imperialist deep state and all that kind of stuff. Because whatever's colonizing the world out there, I mean, it's colonizing the people of this country too. You can see how the cities, the coastal cities are colonizing these flyover states, and you have that same kind of contradiction going on here.
Yeah, it's kind of funny what we're witnessing with the Russia-Ukraine thing. I mean, people are so, they have so much amnesia, like they don't even remember like the WMDs of Iraq and how that was propagated, and now it's like this whole what they're doing with Ukraine is just like absurd. And I think you and Jackson both, like your analysis have been spot on. I actually appreciate watching it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Ukraine thing proves that everything they've been saying is bullshit. It's not about ideology. They've been talking about, the MAGA movement, they're all Nazis, they're all neo-Nazis, that neo-Nazis are the number one problem. I mean, I'm sorry, but those guys in Ukraine, right? You got actual neo-Nazis, real neo-Nazis, the ones that are, with the swastikas and stuff. And suddenly it's not a problem anymore because they're serving the agenda of the deep state and the American ruling class. So, this ideological bullshit, that they've created, this narrative, it's total bullshit.
It's ultimately going to lead to U.S. intervention. I mean, they're already kind of intervening, but I think we're going to end up sending troops over there. And
well, I hope not. I mean, it is absolutely disgusting that Americans are being told we have to pay higher gas prices, we have to pay more money for food for Zelensky, right? I mean, what is this? It's ridiculous. We have to sacrifice our standard of living as Americans. And you know what they're doing this ultimately for, right? They're doing it because they want us to get used to a very reduced standard of living. They want to, obviously, they have their green agenda, their so-called green agenda. What they're basically trying to do is take away all of the wealth that the American working class currently has and turn us into slaves, basically. They want us to be in this gig economy where we don't own anything and we're going to be happy about it, right? So that's what they're preparing us for. And they're blaming Russia. They're calling it Putin's price hike, which is completely, all the shit they've accused the communists of, which is this double speak 1984 shit. That's what they're doing. I mean, what the fuck is Putin's price hike, right? The inflation started before the conflict. And then, even if it was because of what's going on in Ukraine, that's because we decided to sanction Russia. And that doesn't serve the interests of the people in this country. It serves the interests of these global engineers who have this agenda of this world order they want to create with them at the top. And they're basically using our country and our people as a means to an end of that. So the thought that they want to send the sons and daughters of the American working class to go and fight their war, and they're going to use them as cannon fodder and use them as a sacrifice, basically, it's absolutely, disgusting.
Yeah, but that's exactly what it is. It is a sacrifice. Hey, is my mic better?
Yeah, much better.
All right. Yeah. And so I want to go back to this. So you guys are patriotic, leftists or patriotic communists, or I don't want to miss, whatever your ideology is. And that's what I like. So I definitely would like to talk to Jackson and Caleb in the future too, because we can definitely, I'm a nationalist. So that's my ideology, ultra nationalism. So anyway, but an isolationist. So I don't want to be involved in any of this shit either. You know what I mean? People come home messed up from war, like for 20 years.
What was that package that we sent over to Ukraine? Like $14 billion?
Oh,
like
God.
That?
Well, which one?
And like we have people in America that can't even they're struggling to even eat. They served in the military. They're veterans and they're homeless. Like there's just so many problems in America that we should be addressing before we start sending aid to, all these different countries. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, like sending aid to other countries. But first, let's get our own house in order, and then we can start, helping out across the world.
Yeah, I mean, we can't seem to find money that benefits the people here, but we always find the money to, also this money's bullshit anyway, because they're just printing it, right? It's not based on anything. It's not backed by anything. And wow, I don't know. I'm not a guy who gives economic advice because I don't know that much, but we are in for one of the biggest, we're talking about Weimar Germany inflation crisis, in the coming years. It's going to get really ugly here, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another record high this month, 8.5%. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. And they're already coping about it and saying, oh, it's just because of Putin and Russia. And, They're, it's getting scary because we have a White House that seems to be comfortable making excuses for really serious problems. And I joked about this on stream. I'm like, let's say there's a famine in this country. I can see Jen Psaki get on the White House and there's like, what are you going to do about this famine? She's like, okay, we're working on it. We're going to be on it pronto. And we're doing anything I can to work with our partners in the private sector. And, we'll relieve this famine. I mean, like, they'll make excuses for anything, right? If government's
they'll make it a plan to battle childhood obesity. See, the famine was to battle childhood obesity, so we needed a famine because, it is. You're right. It's like bizarro world, clown world. Anyway, every time she gets on the podium, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, people thought the Trump presidency was ridiculous. I mean, this Biden presidency, we are the laughing stock of the world. It's the unprecedented level of incompetence. And sometimes I can't tell. I'm torn. I mean, is it incompetence or is this all part of the plan?
Are you okay?
Hi, yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's just, this is what goes on Cozy. The cops are cool. Every time the cops come over, they're like, oh, you're a podcaster? What's the name of your podcast? And I go, it's called America First. They're like, all right, you like Trump? Yeah. And so that's fun. Inconvenience, but Haas, this is what they're doing to us. These are the enemies of the people that are doing this.
Yeah, I mean, that's wow. I personally haven't gotten that into the toxic yet, but I do have a fair share of very obsessive, very fucked up haters myself. So I understand that.
Yeah, no, but that's because you're doing something right. I saw you go off about being Mongoloid. Someone called you a Mongoloid, and you were like, my ancestors killed your ancestors. That was based as fuck. That was awesome. Well, and here's the thing. What you said earlier was interesting to me. You said that you're not ideological, which I feel the same way. Like, I feel like I want the government to serve the people. And it's not about like, we have this doctrine of ideas and things. It's like, as far as healthcare goes, you have these like people on the so-called right, and they say, well, we need like a market-based solution because free markets means political freedom and, all this crap. And you got people on the left that say, well, healthcare is a human right. And that's like, let's just give the people healthcare, like whatever works. Like, obviously we want people to have healthcare. It's ridiculous right now. I mean, healthcare is insane. The way it works it is way too expensive. And you could blame some of that on the government, some of that on, I would say a lot of it's on the government, on administration and Medicare and all that. But regardless of that fact, we want people to have healthcare. And that's just like one example where the right to their grave will be like, no, it has to be a certain way. I don't care. And I think that's where Putin, like you as a, maybe more of a Marxist bent and me with like a definitely Catholic bent, we both look at him and say, well, here is just a leader. Here's an autocratic leader who took his country and, like you said, defended it from these hostile foreign interests and raised the standard of living, raised the GDP per capita, made Russia truly sovereign and autonomous and independent from the global system. And like literally who would be opposed to that? People say, well, but it's not a liberal democracy. Who cares? It's like we're a liberal democracy and everything sucks. Europe is a liberal democracy and everything sucks. It doesn't actually matter what the system is or the idea is. Let's just have good outcomes. I happen to think autocracy is better. What are your thoughts on that? Do you suppose? I think that really you can have autocracy or oligarchy. I don't think there is a democracy. And I just think autocracy is the way to go. But what do you think about that and the rest of it?
The thing about democracy I like is older. I like the demos, the people aspect of democracy. I think actually Russia's more democratic than here because we have an oligarchy, right? The way I see history is that you either kind of have a popular leader like Julius Caesar or Putin or Stalin, whatever, or you have these oligarchs, these invisible oligarchs. You never have a society where it's just, you don't have a leader, right? You either have one leader that represents the people or you have an oligarchy that represents the ruling class, right? So to me, that's my view on that. It's interesting when it comes to that ideology thing and importance of being pragmatic is, a lot of the people who defend the free market, and I sympathize a little bit, right? But that ends up where they go full circle and ends up having them defend monopolies that exist right now, right? So the way I see it is that, to me, being against capitalism is also about being against the government bureaucracy, the red tape, the incompetence, the overreach of the government, which collaborates with these monopolies in order to secure the profits of the ruling class, right? So that's how I see that whole thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's really the meaningful alliance, is just, let's just talk about interest-based politics. And like, even from a right-wing perspective, the criticism from the left is, well, he's this ideological racist, or he's this ideological anti-Semite. And like, here's the thing. As far as like, Jewish influence goes, or Jewish power, I have my feelings about that, but I don't like wake up every day and say like my worldview is about like Jewishness or something. It's just that you recognize certain facts about the way that groups are, and and you have to, as a society, figure out how to have good outcomes for the society. I don't wake up and say, well, I have this ideological conviction about race or whatever. It's like, look, the races are what they are. There's divergences. Okay. There's disparities. And if we want to have a society that is cohesive, and if we want to have a society where there's a high standard of living, we have to take these things into account. And I just don't know like where the resistance comes from that, because I feel like there are, people that might be more left wing where there would be a lot of agreement, except for they're hung up on this, like, it's almost like they have an ideological resentment towards white people or whiteness. Like the way that I see it, the sort of Trumpian expression of whiteness, I don't see that as much different than the sort of, Black Power type stuff. I don't see that as much different than like the La Raza stuff. It's like, let people sort of express their ethnic pride, their, indigenous pride, whatever it is. But for some reason, left-wing people say like, well, we'll do that for all these other guys. But when white people do it, it's this like special category. It's white supremacy, which has a long history and this and that. And I think it's really more like, this is just the history of the world. The world is a messy place with lots of peoples and complex histories. And, we're all going to try and fit into America. I'm under no illusions about the fact that America is no longer a completely white nation. And I don't think that's on the horizon in the future. So it's really just a question of, how are we going to get a regime, and how are we going to get policies where there's not ethnic conflict? How are we going to get a regime and policies where there's rising standard of living and cohesion? And, like Russia's a multicultural, multi-ethnic society, and I don't look at that and say, well, that's horrible, it needs to be purged. It works. They figured it out. It works. And they've got the largest Muslim population in Europe, I think in absolute terms, not in proportion, because I think France has a similar proportion, but they've got Tatars, they've got Chechens, they've got, all kinds of people, and somehow it all just works. And there's not race riots, and there's always going to be some degree of ethnic conflict, but it's not at an unacceptable level. And we have to recognize that America similarly is now something similar. It's becoming this multicultural empire. And there was maybe a generation in this dissident right space that sort of rejected that. I thought that was sort of just denial. It's just denialism. It is the way that it is. We now have to govern America like an empire. We just now have to govern America the way that it is. Can we arrest some of these trends? Yeah, I think we should shut down immigration. And I think that, we shouldn't have this anti-white discrimination. But, I think fundamentally people can just be on the same page about, I'm not one of these people who wants to fundamentally transform the society. I just want the society to work. I want the government to be part of the solution. I want it to be competent. I think we all really want the same things, but it's all this, CIA spook type shit that gets in the way. All this capitalist, all this nonsense that gets in the way of, let's have a regime that does what must be done. Let's have an American Caesar that just simply does what must be done, what we all know has to be done,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with that race thing. A lot of people don't pay attention to this, but most of that is not even about race. It's about the urban-rural divide, right? Because, the majority of these leftists actually do happen to be white. I mean, that's just an undeniable fact. And they're using the race card in order to beat down the rural white working class, which they kind of have power over, right? They don't want the middle America to rise up, because they don't like the fact that middle America, they're not politically correct, they're more vulgar. It's every kind of prejudice every single ruling class has ever had about, the masses in history, right? And, it's interesting. You mentioned how Russia is also a kind of multicultural society. That's really a bad term.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word. Yeah.
The issue really comes down to the fact that liberal universalism is not compatible with civilization, right? In a civilization, you can have multiple groups coexist. You just but it's about recognition. You recognize that this group has specific interests, it has specific character, has specific whatever, and you take all of those things into account, and the ability for those groups to come to an understanding like they do in Russia, right? That is what a civilization is, in my view. But the thing is that it's so ironic that the left in the United States has this liberal universalist view, right? Where it's like they just assume that everyone is totally the same and there's no differences between the groups that exist culturally or whatever in the United States. When that was the communist policy. The communist policy was drawing from Joseph Stalin's work, The National Question, where you take into account all of the different interests of these national groups within your supranational empire, your kind of civilization, right? The Soviet Union or today's China. And that is how the communists have always approached that national question, right? It's just that we have a synthetic left in America and parts of Europe that took over recently, which has completely kind of erased that more pragmatic, realistic view, right? I'm not dog whistling about race realism, or in case I get taken out of context. I'm just talking about a one that reflects actual reality, right? And the thing I'm noticing too, as a kind of final thing, is that as an American communist, we Americans don't have a civilization yet. I want us to build a real American civilization, right? And my admiration for the communist project actually comes from the fact that these people revived, these civilizations from that had lasted, hundreds or even thousands of years. I mean, Russia, China, these are all very old, multi-ethnic civilizations. And I think we can learn from that here in the United States. And we're starting to notice a trend where, they can't pull this race card shit anymore. You look at, Black Americans, Latino Americans, whatever, they're all starting to become more based, basically, right? They're turning away from the woke liberal agenda. And we increasingly seeing this thing where they can't really, race has always been used by urban white people as a weapon against rural white people, right? And they can't do that anymore. So all of the based forces in America, I think, are going to come together, and we'll recognize our differences, but we're not going to be used as proxies for this conflict of the ruling class.
That's true. Yeah, it's these urban whites. Is that what we're calling them now? Huh? Are we? Because is that the new? It's these urban white people, the eternal.
Well, urban, college educated. Yeah. I mean, that's
They feel at home everywhere and nowhere. That's not what I. No, I'm giving you a hard time. Yeah. I know I'm giving you a hard time. But no, you're absolutely right, and that's well said. You're right, because you're right. Multiculturalism is part of liberal internationalism. And I think that's actually extremely well put, that it is incompatible with civilization. And I always talk about this on my show. People say, you're an ethno-nationalist, you want a whites-only country. And I say, look at the countries that I admire, Russia and China. Now, some say, it's the Chi-Coms, and they say Putin's a fascist and all this. But Russia and China, it's not multicultural. Maybe a better word is multi-ethnic or multiracial, in the sense that they have, large ethnic groups living within the border and governed by the same government. And, yet somehow it works. And in China, you've really got the Han Chinese core, and then you've got the four peripheral states, the Tibetans, the Manchurians, the Mongols, the Uyghurs. In Russia, you've got the ethnic Russian core in the West in the major cities. And then you've got these other polities. But when we think of Russia, we don't necessarily think of Chechens, although Chechens think of themselves as Russians. We know what we think of Russians. And same thing with Chinese. We think of Chinese, we don't necessarily think of Manchurians or Uyghurs or Tibetans. We think of the Han Chinese. And I think that, like you said, a civilization can have groups of people living together in harmony, maybe separately or mixed in or something like that. There can be harmony, but you're right. It is a sort of project of imposing liberalism on everybody, sort of stripping them away of their ethnic character, stripping them away of their local indigenous character, and this and why and for what? This push to just integrate everybody, smash them all together like atoms in the cities. And, for what? I think you're right. Ultimately, the project serves the capitalist class. I think it's to make better workers, make a more governable population, prevent any kind of national solidarity, which you can have between ethnicities. Russia has national solidarity despite having Muslims and Orthodox and again, Chechens and ethnic Russians and so on. You can have a national solidarity, but not when you're trying to, basically rape all the different groups of people with this kind of like corporate, unipole type culture. I completely agree with that. And, and it's funny that it really does seem to be that this liberal internationalist parasitic ideology, which is ruining these societies. And that's where I come from. A lot of these, conservatives attack me and they go, well, communism is the number one threat. It's these Chi-coms or it's whatever. And it's like, no, the number one menace to the world is the liberal ideology promulgated by the West. It is being promulgated in the embassies. It is being promulgated in the consulates of the U.S. State Department. It is being enforced by the U.S. military. It is being upheld by the international so-called rules-based system created by the United States after World War II and the Cold War, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank. That is what is wrecking the world. That is what was wrecking Afghanistan. That's what's wrecking Eastern Europe. That's what's wrecking everything. And in its wake, they say, well, it's these autocracies on the rise. Erdogan, Assad, Putin, Xi Jinping. It's like, no, that's the reassertion of civilization. That's the reassertion of sovereignty, of national identity, of these sort of autocratic leaders asserting independence from the oligarchs. I support that. I don't think it's even really it's not an ideological statement to support that. It's, if anything, it's the negation. That's what I always say. People say, you're a Russia shill, you're a China shill. I don't necessarily support China in itself. I have no kinship with Russia. I support China insofar as it is not the United States, insofar as it is not liberal international, and same with Russia, and same with the Taliban. I don't love the Taliban. I don't live in Afghanistan. I don't know if I agree with chopping off hands and all that, but I'm not Afghan. It's not my place to say what their government should be. It's not the U.S. military pushing all this woke. Women have to vote. Why? Why do we get to say that? So, and that's where I think there's a broad potential for consensus, I think, between people, sort of these unassuming, unexpected allies, like people coming from a Marxist position or from a reactionary position.
Yeah, that is the American way from the start. And we were not supposed to interfere with the political business of all these other, the founding fathers, they said this directly, right? And it was only really until our country got hijacked by the British Empire again, right? And this is especially after World War II, where we started to have this view where we're going to have a unipolar American system where we're going to impose our ideology on the whole world. But, it's not really ours because it only serves the ruling class. And that brings me to the point is that, multipolarity, which is, it's what we're talking about here, that there's these new poles emerging. We also need to have an American polarity, right? We need to have an American kind of way, right? And I think that's what separates me from most other kind of tankies who are, pro-Russia, pro-China, is that I actually don't just think we should just cheer on Russia and China, right? We also have to build something here, and we have to assert America's sovereignty, against this kind of deep state and against this kind of, more global agenda that they have, right? For a unipolar world. So there has to be an American civilization. There has to be an specific American polarity with its own, characteristics.
Yeah, that's where we come in. That's where America First comes in, because we come in and we say, let's have a truly sovereign, that's Michelle Malkin. That's her show. Her show is called Sovereign Nation. And it's about restoring sovereignty, true sovereignty to America. Because, and that's actually a really profound statement, because you're right. America, like the other nations, is enslaved. It's been hijacked, and it's being used, because the power of the American regime comes from the economy of the American nation, and the economy is the people. They're and maybe there's a Marxian analysis. They're sort of stealing the productive potential of the American country, its resources, its workers, its capital. And they're using that to build their military, their mercenary army, and they're sending that mercenary army and its Navy and the Air Force around the world to enforce their ideology. And so it's literally like a brain parasite attaching itself to the country. And so you're right. And I think that's a very important distinction, because the criticism that I hear sometimes from people on the right-wing side is they say, well, you're devolving into third worldism and you're championing these other countries at the expense of the American cause. And, there's a fine line between hating your country and sort of hating the regime. And I think you're right. That's actually a very important thing, is not just liberation for so-called Palestine or liberation for Russia, but liberation for America. Liberate America from DC. Have a government that harnesses the productive capacities of the American land and the American people in the interest of the Americans, and not in a way, not for liberalism, not for capitalism, not for whatever, but for the people. And we're a rich nation. Why don't we have healthcare? That's a great question. We're a very rich nation. Why don't we have a high standard of living? Why don't we have bullet trains? Why don't we have, you go to these other countries and they have nicer things than us, and they're not as wealthy as we are. And that's just because they're under better management. They're under sovereign management, whether it be Russia or China or whoever. And what we're doing is we're taking all this wealth and it's being funneled into the capitalists. It's being funneled into these global projects. So that's a very good point. It's a very important statement.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen what this ruling class has done to the economy of this country. They've deindustrialized us. They're trying to diminish our productive capacities, actually, because they don't believe in an economy that's based on real things or real labor or real hard physical stuff. They believe in an economy that's based on financial abstractions and derivatives, and then on the other hand, tech, whatever that fucking means. So, part of this is also about reindustrializing America. It's also about bringing the factories back, bringing back our manufacturing capacity, our productive capacity, building infrastructure, building trains, building fusion energy, and that's kind of where what I admire so much about China is its developmentalist economy, right? And the way I see it is that when I praise China, or I praise Russia, I want to draw all of these positives and learn from them, so that we can give the economic sovereignty back to the American people, which was also robbed of us. I mean, America's not really a sovereign economic power. I mean, to have sovereignty, it has to actually be grounded in these definite industries which serve the people of that country, right? We are ruled by the City of London. We are ruled by, financial institutions, BlackRock and hedge funds and banks and all this kind of shit. So to me, there's also that battle. You talk about Dugan, he talks about the land power versus the sea power, right?
Yes.
Same thing with that is also that kind of, industry versus finance, right? And it's kind of the same thing we're talking about.
Absolutely. Well, and that's why it's been so incredible to watch Putin and this sanctions regime that we put up against them. And of course, it doesn't work because Russia has real things. We're going to ban your banks from doing business with the world. And guess what? They make oil. They make natural gas. They grow food. They make things. So our conception of economy is so wrong. Well, their GDP will contract by 10%. Okay, well, they have oil and they have gas and they have the things that a society needs. Europe does not. Europe does not produce natural gas. Europe does not produce the petroleum products they need. They do not produce the wheat and the corn and the grain that they need. And that's why, Russia will have a diminished GDP. Their economy will contract or whatever on paper, but Europe is going to be cold during the winter. They will be cold and they will be hungry and they'll have to ride their bikes to work because they don't make things. And that's so true. How can you say that you're an independent sovereign nation when you don't make the things you need? If I have to go to the store to buy food, well, I'm completely dependent on the store. And so in some sense, I'm kind of, and it's not a perfect comparison because you have scale, obviously, and it's not, you have the fallacy of composition, but I'm dependent on someone else. So I can't, that relationship then is very vital to my survival in a real tangible sense. It's also true what you said about the land versus the naval power. And that's a big part of, maybe it was inevitable that America would become this way, like the United Kingdom. Some people say it's this Anglo thing, it's this individualistic thing, but the UK is an island, and the United States is, in a sense, was an island because it was bounded by two oceans. And so was a naval power and dependent on trade, although it wasn't always that way. Some would say the Civil War is a big part of why we are the way we are, because the North triumphed over the agrarian South. But it's true. Develop the land, develop the industry, make things again. That was a big part of the Trump agenda was, buy American, hire American, reindustrialize. I don't know if that was really achieved, but that is a big part of it as well. How can we say that we're sovereign when we're so dependent on international trade, and when we buy all of our manufactured industrial things from the third world, from India, China, Malaysia? What are your thoughts on Trump? Did you support Trump, or what? I'm curious what your thoughts are on him.
So, I believe in having an independent working class party, right? So obviously I didn't vote for Republican. I've never voted in my whole life. But let's just say it was very exciting when Trump won. We were looking at that with a lot of, excitement and curiosity to see what would happen. But, although I sympathize heavily with the MAGA movement, I have to say Trump, it was very disappointing, how that turned out. He kind of was still in bed with the Republican establishment. He had those people, Pompeo and Bolton, and, they had their kind of agenda. And then the whole thing about, with the Middle East and stuff. So to me, I think the MAGA movement, is definitely going to have a place in a future populist movement here in the U.S. But I've never voted in my whole life. I'm not registered to vote. I don't care about voting. But it's obviously I sympathize with Trump way more than the rest, and obviously probably the best people in Congress right now. Because, I tend to focus on geopolitics the most, because geopolitics is a proxy for our ruling class. People like, what's her name? Taylor Greene. What is?
Oh, yeah. Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah. People like her, they're like the most promising people in Congress right now. And she's obviously part of that MAGA movement as opposed to the establishment Republicans. So I don't know. This is something I talk with Jackson a lot. Is the future going to be a third party? Is it going to come out of the Republic? We're still kind of working that out, figuring out what that's going to be. But yeah, we're very pragmatic, not really too ideological. But, when it comes to America, right, I think this country has always been an unfinished project. Right? 1776 to me was the beginning, right? It wasn't the end of everything. It was the beginning, right? We have to build on that more, because this country still had a lot of influence from that British Empire, which we kicked out, and that's also responsible for why we became a naval power, despite being such a big kind of landmass, right? And not a small island. And Canada has also played a big part in that, obviously. Canada has been used by the British for a very long time to, influence and sabotage our country. And to me, though, I think we do need to keep in mind, right? I'm kind of hopping from one thing to another, but the agenda that they have for us when it comes to deindustrialization, making all of our standard of living poor, the kind of so-called green agenda, it's basically like these monopolies that are in power right now, they want to stay on top. They want to prevent anyone from being able to get wealth to be able to challenge them, right? And ultimately, what that involves in is an agenda that ultimately is going to be depopulation, degrowth, deindustrialization, and it's all to be able to maintain their position on the top. So, you look at why do we have this inflation crisis? Why after COVID did all this shit happen? It's all, to me, it's very clearly part of an agenda. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. In the words of Klaus Schwab.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so based. And I agree with you. I don't think you'll find many true believers in the Trump revolution that weren't disappointed by the fact that he was sort of sort of acclimated, assimilated into the establishment. We have this sort of expression. I heard this from someone that worked in the White House. He told me that, Trump ran as an independent in 2016. He ran as a Republican in 2020. And I thought that's such a succinct way to put that. And that kind of summarizes the transformation that occurred. It's just night and day. Because in 2016, he was saying things like, the World Trade Center came down under your brother's reign. That was awesome. I was like, let's go. And then in 2020, it's like socialism will never, and it's like, what the fuck? I don't care about socialism. I care about globalism and liberalism and all that. And I agree, but I think that, like you said, it's going to be part of it. But I truly believe that MAGA was just the first step. I think that was the opening salvo. That was the first shot, and it was necessary. It's a necessary first step because it changed the conversation. And it was such this black swan sort of event because no one could have predicted this. It was supposed to be Jeb Bush or Rubio or Ted Cruz were the front runners. And then you got this guy who comes out of nowhere with this totally unique style, totally idiosyncratic, saying like globalism and with the Sam Francis type ideology was totally, and he was never going to be the guy, in my opinion, that delivered the final victory. And I don't even think it would have been possible in terms of time and personnel. We knew from the start what was going to happen. He was going to get in there and the recalcitrant system would sort of, they would reform and launch a counterattack. And that's exactly what they did over the past 4 years. They did the subversion, but they also did this attack from outside. But that's not a black pill. A lot of people take that and they say, oh, it's over. Trump lost. It's just, whatever. But it's like, no, don't be upset that whatever. Smile that it happened. It happened, and now there is a future, and it's sort of like this big boom, and it's sending all this material out there, and we can ride that wave and take advantage of it and take it to the next level. And that's really been the project of America First. My show started a week after the inauguration, and I took that and said, okay, well, that was sort of phase one. Now let's look at the next 100 years. I also think it's important, and you're so right about how 1776 was the starting point, because I see this on the left and the right. A lot of people are sort of ready to abandon America, and people blame like America for the problems. It's not America. It never was. The founding was based. The Americans are based. The country is based. It's this fucking subversion that's gone on, which is wrong. And it's sort of like attacking your body instead of attacking the cancer. The body's not the problem. The cancer is the problem. And I think a big part of what is going to animate the movement, the character of the movement, is going to be an American patriotic sort of nationalistic fervor. And let's not discard the founders. Let's not discard our glorious past, our heritage, our heroes. That's going to be a part of it, but it's about restoring it, because the problem is so much of it, you can understand why people, I think, make that mistake. It's because so much of it has been bastardized. The Mont Pelerin Institute and these libertarians, they make it out like Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton were like Ayn Rand, and like the founding fathers were these libertarians, and that's so not what it was about. When you go back and read Hamilton in particular, it's completely different. Our mythology, we have to revive, and we need to tell the truth about it. And I think then you can fashion a movement where it's truly American in character. It's not ideological. It's not third worldist. It's sort of like truly an American independence movement. So I think that's another very salient point. And that is where I think I would draw the line against. I know there's a lot of elements in the left, obviously, that are anti-American and all that. There's also a lot of that on the right that say, like, America's done. America's going to break up. We got to move on. And it's like, no, I'm not ready to give up America. We're going to rule America from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the Rio Grande to the whatever the parallel is in Washington. We want the whole country. And I agree. We want to make a high civilization out of America, because you're right. America is a young country. And you could say that it lacks culture in some sense. You could say that it lacks the sort of cohesion that the Europeans have, these like 1,000-year-old civilizations. We want to fight for a real America. I also don't have this low definition of America. Like it's about guns and it's rootin' and it's tootin'. Like I think there's more to America than that. I look at like New York City in like the industrial era. I look at like LA in the 50s. I see a real high civilization America. You look at like Gershwin and you look at the canon of American literature, and it's, in some sense it doesn't really compare to some of the European stuff, but there's a foundation there to build upon. You look at like the transcendentalist, the natural type stuff. Like there's something there, and there's more to it than fucking Kid Rock. No offense, I know that might come across like classist or like anti-white, but seriously, I don't like Kid Rock. Sorry. It's Glenn Miller, not Kid Rock. We want Glenn Miller and Benny Goodman, not fucking Kid Rock, okay? So I agree with you. That's a very important thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned transcend. We have such a rich literary, intellectual, and philosophical tradition. I mean, you look at authors like Jack London, you look at Steinbeck, you look at these people. I mean, this is what we should be teaching our kids in schools, by the way. We're teaching a bunch of fucking bullshit. And meanwhile, we have this authentically American, literary canon. I mean, I don't want to get sidetracked, but, also back to Trump. That's actually what I was going to say is that, as someone who's very aware of the history of anti-establishment movements in this country, I mean, dating from the Farmers Alliance, the Populist Party, all the way up to, I don't know, Ross Perot, and then you had Ron Paul, right, which was something people forget. But, Ron Paul was that was like the biggest threat to the government for a long time, for the 2000s and the 90s, in my view. I mean, it was a real movement, right? I have to say, I mean, Trump, that was a treat. I feel like that was just a treat. We're probably not going to get that for a long time. It was just a fluke, a one-off where the establishment got caught with their pants down. We had 4 years of, but also I'm more optimistically, I mean, it was irreversible. It changed American politics forever. I mean, you can't go back to normal. I mean, they're trying to, the so-called adults are back in the room. I mean, fucking Biden, I think he's a little too much of an adult, if you ask me. I mean, maybe pushing about, maybe 10 or 20 years too, adult. But, it's just, I think here's the conclusion I draw from Trump, right? You go again to China or Russia or literally any other country in the world that has sovereignty, right? Has a patriotic, sovereign population. And they love Trump. They thought Trump was great. I mean, they thought he was funny, but they were like, oh, we prefer. I mean, Africans love Trump. I don't know. A lot of people don't know that. Think Trump is a huge racist. I mean, if you go to Africa, those people really liked Trump. I mean, they liked him better than anyone else. They liked him better than Obama. They liked him better than, any Biden, obviously. And I think the reason for that is because Trump brought back a kind of post or non-liberal politics that's based in interest, right? For him, it was American interest, right? I mean, I'm a communist, so for me, it's the working class interest, right? Also American, but yeah, the work. So you have this liberal universalism where you just have this idea where it's like, oh, we have a liberal democracy, and the president is just supposed. There's no class conflict going on. There's no conflict at all, underlying conflict. It's all just a liberal democracy where it's about making sure the mainstream media and whatever have all the freedoms, and the Wall Street has the ability to do whatever it wants, and we call that the free market. Even though they're monopoly capitalists and there's no free market whatsoever. So that's why Trump was so significant. Yeah, that's not reversible. But to be completely honest with you, as far as where to go forward from here, I think it's kind of a tough question. I know the Republicans are going to clean house in 2022 for the midterms, right? But is that going to be the MAGA Republicans? I don't think those Republicans are loyal, right? That Republican establishment. So it's a big question,
Yeah, they're trash. I mean, believe me, we're trying to get involved in the midterms, and all the good guys are pussies and drop out. Okay. I mean, we've had I try to get behind a couple guys and they dropped out. And we're still supporting the ones that came to our conference and everything. But yeah. And the problem is Trump is now being instrumentalized by the establishment, and everything that he earned, the credibility he earned with the people, the well-deserved popular support for being their voice and everything, he's now being just used as a mascot for the establishment, for Ronna McDaniel and Kevin McCarthy. He's selling his endorsements. I mean, there's a court of people that surround him, and they literally sell his endorsement. People pay these courtiers to go to Mar-a-Lago, and then Trump will give an endorsement, and then this person, whoever it is, gets paid. And so they're endorsing all these garbage rhinos. They're endorsing all these garbage establishment types. And they keep talking about making Kevin McCarthy the Speaker of the House. Making Kevin McCarthy the Speaker of the House is immaterial to me. Making Trump the president is a big deal. Making Kevin McCarthy the Speaker of the House, yeah, yawn. It makes no difference. Pelosi, McCarthy, McConnell, Schumer. I didn't sign up for that. Like you said, I'm not voting for that shit. I stopped voting after I voted for Trump. That was it. I told people to stay home. They said, go and vote in the Georgia Senate runoff. I said, stay home. Stop voting. This is not, I vote for Trump. I vote for revolution. I do not vote for Republicans. I do not vote for, fighting socialism or whatever. And you're right. And to me, the biggest question, I have been using this to borrow a phrase from Joseph Stalin. The question is, Who will conquer who? Will the revolution conquer the system, or will the system conquer the revolution? And we really run this risk where you're seeing the language of the revolution and even some of the people, they're being conquered by the capitalists, and these billionaires are buying their way into the populist movement. And that's where you get a guy like Joe Kent, who's up there in Washington State, and he's running, and he's the favorite of Peter Thiel and some of these other guys. And he's using this sort of he's talking about so-called inclusive populism and all this kind of stuff, but he's being funded by billionaires. He's being funded by these guys. And it's the same thing that happened with the Ron Paul Revolution. Ron Paul Revolution became Young Americans for Liberty, and Young Americans for Liberty is now the arm of like the libertarians. And they have Cato speakers. And again, they were co-opted, and the Tea Party was co-opted. All these movements get bought out, and the Trump movement cannot have the same thing happen. That's why I've always said my job is the guarantor of the Trump revolution. I want to be the vanguard of the Trump revolution and say, no, you're not going to touch this. The gay Republicans are not going to touch this. This is unique. This is different. It is controversial. It should offend. It should provoke. It shouldn't be about so-called industrial policy or common good originalism or whatever ism like some think tank is going to come up with, some Indian at some think tank with a bust of Teddy Roosevelt in a podcast paid for by billionaires is going to come up with. It has to maintain its based character. And by based, I don't mean necessarily like racist. I don't mean it's like Republican. I don't mean it's like pro Second Amendment. By based, it means like not puppeted. It's not controlled. It's like it's the vernacular language of the people. It speaks the language of the people. That's what based means. It's like the way that the street people talk. It's like the street truth. And it has to maintain that character of basedness and not be transformed into like, not be like PR, manipulated by a PR firm or some consultant agency or some think tank into like another political product to sell to the capitalists, to sell to the donors. So in my opinion, the path forward is for people like you to coalesce behind America First. We have to embrace it. The future is fusionism, okay? But not fusionism between like Jewish neocons and like Jewish libertarians. The future is a fusion between hardcore communists, Stalinists, and hardcore not national, but hardcore nationalists, America First, Trump-loving white patriots, Christians. To me, that's the fusion, is Catholic nationalist types, sort of Bernie bro-based guys that get it. That's a real alliance. That's the alliance that will dominate the world.
I have a question.
You know, in the meantime, I wonder, right, with Trump, I think the thing that I'm interested the most right now is, can the First Amendment be sustained on big tech? And I kind of feel like I don't really care who wins elections anymore. I just, whoever's willing to defend the First Amendment on big tech, I think I don't know how much I can do, but I just hope they win, right? And because I think, so we have a special interest, we're communists, right? So we want an independent working class party, right? We want a party that's an interest group for the American working class, a tribune of the people, right? And it doesn't have to be the only one, but we just want that to exist, right? Because that doesn't exist. I mean, the capitalists have their own class. I mean, they have their own party. They have two of them, right? So we want a working class party. And that's hard when you don't have the First Amendment. I mean, social media is how you spread the message. It's how you build anything. So to me, it doesn't matter where you are. If you're an anti-establishment person interested in upsetting the status quo, you should be behind anyone who can restore the First Amendment to the public square, right? Because, as much as I critique liberal democracy, we do have a fake liberal democracy, right? And those founding principles of our country and the Constitution and whatever, I mean, that gives us some rights and liberties that I think are good, right? And we're witnessing kind of how we are becoming no longer a liberal democracy, but not in a based way where it's like Russia with Putin. It's like we have this oligarchic control of like this new financial Wall Street dictatorship, this BlackRock dictatorship, where our civil liberties are being curtailed like never before, being censored left and right on the internet. And then Americans are being called domestic terrorists, right? which is unprecedented. It's because of the January 6th nothing burger, right? So I think it's pretty dangerous, right? And, I definitely think the foundations of this state, American state, are going to be shaken and tested the next 2 years. Whether that's a civil, who knows, right?
It's true. Well, and you're right about that. The medium of communication is critical. I don't think it's any coincidence that the domination of the deep state coincides with the advent of mass media, because it's so critical for these revolutions. It's the paper, it's people printing pamphlets and salons and things like that. And once you get mass media, you get the centralization of where people get their information. And, in the past, it was television and radio, and now it's the internet. And when everyone gets their information from Facebook and determined by an algorithm, and it's controlled by censorship, you have this total information control. And so all anyone's reading is regime media. And I think what gave us Trump was social media, because for the first time, you had this environment where there was this adoption of a medium that was uncontrolled, which is Twitter and YouTube and all that. And they were able to read a truly revolutionary message. And that's why that was the first thing to go. The next day they get on the meeting and they say, this can never be allowed to happen again. And then the censorship regime began, and it reached its sort of apogee at the time with the election fraud. And they said, we're going to ban any claim of election fraud and any COVID disinformation, outright, just like editorial, like explicit, like regime censorship, whatever you think about it. But they said, like, we're just going to censor particular topics for the purpose of like national security or whatever, for the purpose of domestic stability. And you're right, there will be no revolution without that medium, without a mass media that we can utilize. And unlike in the old days, it's centralized and people are just not, because of the existence of that, it's sort of like cars. Once there's a car, cities are designed with the car in mind, and there's only roads. So it's one of these like technologies where it has this effect that it totalizes. Everything must submit to the automobile. So once the car comes around, everything's got to be on roads. And so now there's just no more walking. You can not own a car, but you can't walk anywhere, because now everything's far apart. And in the same way, now that you've got social media, nobody's reading. Nobody's going to read your pamphlet. Nobody's going to read the other forms of media. And so it's like, it's absorbing everybody's eyeballs. It's absorbing all the communication, and then they've got a monopoly on it. So I agree. I mean, that remains the most critical issue for any opponent of the regime, no matter what the flavor is. I mean, I think that's right.